You ever feel like your body is trying to tell you something, but you just keep brushing it off? That was Ronald. 72 years old, retired firefighter from Missouri. Broad shoulders, big heart, used to carrying the world on his back. But lately, he'd been carrying something else, too. A heaviness in his chest, a fog in his mind, a weariness in his bones. His doctor called it pre-diabetes. His wife called it just getting older. But deep down, Ronald knew something wasn't right. One morning, sitting by the window with his usual coffee and toast, Ronald blacked out for a few seconds. Just enough to drop the mug and scare his golden retriever, Lucy. That was his wake-up call. Not a heart attack, thank God, but the cardiologist wasn't optimistic. Arteries narrowing, blood sugar creeping up, blood pressure too high. But here's the thing. Ronald wasn't ready to give up his independence, his walks with Lucy, or his Sunday barbecues. So he did something most people don't. He started listening, not to his doctor, but to his kitchen. That's when he rediscovered something that had been sitting on his counter for years, forgotten like an old friend: garlic. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, garlic? Really? Hear me out. When you crush garlic and let it sit for a few minutes, it releases a compound called allicin. That's nature's own blood thinner, blood sugar stabilizer, and artery cleanser. Not a supplement, not a pill, just a humble clove. Ronald didn't believe it either, until he tried it. He began every morning with 4 raw cloves, crushed and left to rest, stirred into warm water with a squeeze of lemon and a spoon of raw honey. He called it his morning fire. Said it burned the fog right out of his brain. Within 3 weeks, his fasting blood sugar dropped noticeably. His blood pressure, once as stubborn as Missouri humidity, started easing down. He said he felt like the rust was coming off his joints. But here's the lesson. It wasn't the garlic alone. It was the intention, the ritual, the decision to stop waiting for someone else to fix him. See, for people over 60, the real danger isn't just high blood sugar. It's believing that decline is inevitable, that pain is normal, that fatigue is your new reality. It isn't. Ronald made a small, almost laughable change. But that change told his body something powerful. I still care. That's what this recipe is really about. Not the garlic, not the lemon, not the honey. It's about the message you send to your own heart when you choose to show up for yourself again. And if a 72-year-old man from Missouri can do that with a clove of garlic and a stubborn dog at his side, maybe it's time we all listen to our kitchens a little more closely. Margaret had always been a tea drinker. Morning chamomile, evening peppermint. But it wasn't until after her second stroke that tea stopped being a comfort and started becoming a mission. She was 75, living alone in Asheville, North Carolina, in a little blue house her late husband built with his own hands. Margaret was sharp, witty, but her heart, well, it wasn't keeping up. Her blood pressure had crept higher with every passing year, and her doctors told her what they tell everyone: more pills, less salt, less joy. But Margaret didn't want less. She wanted to feel alive again. She remembered a conversation she once had with a neighbor from Barbados, a nurse who swore by a ruby-red flower they called sorrel. Back then, Margaret thought it was just folklore, but desperation has a way of opening your ears.
She looked it up. In America, we call it hibiscus. That's when the pieces started coming together. Hibiscus tea, it turns out, is no old wives' tale. It's packed with natural compounds that gently relax the blood vessels, allowing blood to flow like it should, freely, calmly. It doesn't crash your system like medication. It invites your heart to take a breath. So Margaret made a simple switch. Every afternoon, instead of coffee or soda, she brewed herself a deep crimson cup of hibiscus tea. Sometimes she added a cinnamon stick or a splash of lemon. She made it beautiful, because healing should feel like a gift, not a punishment. In just 2 weeks, her numbers began shifting. Her diastolic pressure lowered. Her ankles, which used to swell by dinner time, felt less heavy. But more than that, and Margaret said this, with tears in her eyes, she could breathe again. Not just physically, emotionally. She felt like her body wasn't fighting her anymore. Here's the lesson. Healing doesn't always come from something new. Sometimes it comes from something ancient, something that's been around longer than your symptoms, just waiting for you to remember it. For those of us who've spent decades caring for others, it can feel foreign to turn that care inward. But hibiscus tea isn't just for your arteries, it's for your spirit. It's a reminder that small changes done consistently with care, with beauty, can soften even the hardest places inside us. Margaret's story isn't rare. It's just real. Real woman, real struggle, real flower, real results. And just like that, a little red bloom became the breath her heart had been waiting for. James was not a man who trusted vegetables. At 69, a retired steelworker from Pittsburgh, his idea of green was the rust on his old toolbox. But after his second ER visit for chest pain, things changed. He didn't have a heart attack, not yet. The scans showed inflammation around his arteries, elevated markers, creeping blood pressure. His doctor called it silent inflammation, a term that didn't sit right with James. "You ever hear of something silent that still kills you?" he muttered to his daughter that night. That's when she sat him down, handed him a glass of something pale green and said, "Dad, it's time." It was celery juice. James winced. "You want me to drink rabbit food?" But he drank it anyway. Because something in him, the same stubborn will that helped him raise 3 kids, work double shifts, and bury his wife with dignity, whispered that maybe this wasn't nonsense. Within 1 week, something shifted. The bloating that had become his new normal after dinner started to ease. He didn't feel like a balloon about to pop. He started waking up lighter and not just in body. But here's where it gets interesting. James, who never read labels or watched documentaries, began to ask questions. Why does this crunchy stick help so much? What he learned surprised him. Celery is more than fiber and water. It contains powerful polyphenols that reduce internal inflammation, the same kind that silently scars arteries, fuels insulin resistance, and whispers danger to the heart. Its natural diuretic action flushes out excess sodium, lightening the load on your blood vessels. And its potassium content works quietly, relaxing tense arterial walls like loosening a knotted rope.
James started blending celery into his morning smoothie with a bit of green apple, lemon, and ginger. He didn't just feel better, he felt less angry, less inflamed in body and mood. That's the lesson here. Sometimes inflammation isn't just physical. It's the slow burn of regret, the tension of years pushing through stress without pause. Celery of all things became James's reset button. Not because it cured him, but because it asked nothing and gave everything. Healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just crunches softly in the background, while your heart finally exhales. So if a tough old man from Pittsburgh can find peace in a stalk of celery, maybe you can too. Clara hadn't seen the ocean in over 20 years, but every time she poured that deep red pomegranate juice into her glass, it reminded her of Santa Monica sunsets. She used to live there, back when life was louder, brighter, and her heart didn't ache with every step. Now at 68, Clara lived in Arizona, where the air was dry and her energy even drier. She was a retired school librarian, widowed, with a soft spot for crossword puzzles and a deepening fear that her best days were behind her. Her blood tests told a grim story. High LDL cholesterol, high blood pressure, borderline glucose. Her doctor had a word for it: metabolic syndrome. But Clara had her own word: worn out. And yet, she refused to be written off like an overdue library book. One afternoon, at her local farmer's market, a vendor handed her a tiny paper cup. It was pomegranate juice, fresh pressed, tart, bold, with a sweetness that lingered. It felt alive. Something inside her stirred not just her taste buds, but a flicker of remembrance. She bought a bottle. That same night, as the desert sun dipped behind the cacti, Clara sipped the juice while flipping through old photo albums. Her hand trembled slightly, but her heart, it felt curious again. Within weeks, the numbers began to shift. Her systolic pressure, the one that tells you how hard your heart is working, began to drop. Her cardiologist was cautiously pleased. But Clara wasn't surprised. She'd done her homework. Pomegranate is loaded with polyphenols, plant compounds that fight oxidative stress like firemen against an inferno. They don't just lower blood pressure, they calm the storm that brews in aging arteries. Studies show they can reduce plaque buildup, improve endothelial function, and even help cholesterol levels behave. But here's what the studies don't say. They don't tell you how it feels to pour something beautiful into your glass each morning and know you're pouring hope into your veins. For Clara, pomegranate wasn't just a fruit. It was color. It was contrast. It was a statement that her life still had richness to offer. Because healing isn't always about the numbers. Sometimes it's about bringing vibrancy back to a life that's started to fade to beige. If you've ever felt like your story is stuck in grayscale, maybe it's time to add something bold, something red, something alive. And now that Clara's story has come to life, shall we keep going? Elias was a former Navy mechanic from San Diego, the kind of man who could fix anything except himself. At 66, he had survived 3 deployments, 2 hurricanes, and the loss of his younger brother to a heart attack at just 59. But what he couldn't outrun was the creeping numbness in his feet, the fatigue that clung to his mornings, and the blood tests that painted a picture of a body under silent siege. His doctor called it type 2 diabetes, early stage. Elias called it a ticking clock. But this isn't a story about surrender. It began one morning when his granddaughter, Hannah, showed up with a mason jar full of something that looked like sawdust. Flax seeds, she said, placing it on his kitchen counter like a challenge. Elias raised an eyebrow. I fought in the Persian Gulf. I'm not afraid of seeds. So he tried it. 2 tablespoons, ground fresh, stirred into his morning oatmeal. He didn't expect anything. But that week, something subtle shifted. He wasn't as hungry by mid-morning. His afternoon slumps weren't as heavy. By the second week, his blood sugar post-breakfast was more stable. But it wasn't until his next lab work that the real shock came. His fasting glucose had dropped. His LDL cholesterol nudged down. Even his A1C, the 3-month average, had improved. How? Flax seeds are nature's quiet warriors. Rich in soluble fiber, they slow down how fast sugar enters the bloodstream. That's key for anyone managing diabetes or fighting off insulin resistance. But it goes deeper. These tiny seeds are packed with alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that calms inflammation and protects artery walls from hardening. And then there are the lignans. Most people have never heard of them, but they're potent antioxidants with hormone-balancing power. They help the body manage fat, process sugar, and even reduce the risk of certain cancers. But for Elias, flax seeds meant something else. They gave him back a sense of control. Every morning, as he ground those seeds fresh and stirred them into his breakfast, he felt like he was doing something precise, deliberate, like tuning an engine. And that's the lesson. Healing isn't always flashy. Sometimes it's about consistency, about honoring your body the way you'd maintain a classic car or a naval ship. Elias didn't need a miracle. He needed a habit that whispered to his cells, "We're not done fighting." So if something as small as a seed could steady the course of a veteran's second act, what could it do for you? Loretta used to dance. Not professionally, just in the kitchen, barefoot, apron twisted, old radio humming some Motown classic. That was before the swelling started. Before her ankles became strangers. Before she began sitting more than moving. Watching more than living. At 65, retired from decades of nursing in Atlanta, Loretta knew the signs. She'd spent her career caring for others, but no one had prepared her for how quickly her own body could betray her. Her blood pressure was high, her sugar was higher, and her legs? They felt like sandbags dragging through molasses. She called it heaviness. Her doctor called it fluid retention. Same pain, different names. One evening, while trying to prepare a simple salad, she sliced into a cucumber out of habit. It had been sitting in the crisper drawer, almost forgotten. As she chewed the first piece, something surprised her. It felt clean, cool, light, almost like it was scrubbing her from the inside out. She began adding cucumber to everything, blending it into her morning green juice, infusing it into her water with mint and lemon, even freezing slices to soothe her eyes after restless nights. Within a few weeks, Loretta noticed something remarkable. Her feet weren't ballooning by noon. Her walks around the block didn't end in breathless frustration. Her blood pressure was lower, not dramatically, but enough to feel the difference. Cucumber, it turned out, wasn't just water. It was medicine in disguise. Over 90% water, yes, but also rich in flavonoids and tannins, powerful plant compounds that reduce inflammation and oxidative stress. For someone like Loretta, dealing with diabetes and vascular fatigue, that means blood vessels stay more elastic, more capable of handling life's pressure without snapping. Cucumber's gentle diuretic effect helped her kidneys release excess sodium and fluid, easing the swelling that had once ruled her days. And the best part? Its glycemic index was almost 0. She could eat it freely, without fear of spiking her sugar. But perhaps the most profound change wasn't physical. Loretta began dancing again. Not like before. Slower now. Wiser. But every step was a defiance against the gravity that had once pinned her down. That's the truth most health articles won't tell you. Sometimes healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it tiptoes back in on quiet feet and a slice of cucumber. So if you've been waiting for something bold to change your life, maybe what you really need is something simple. Tom didn't grow up near the ocean. He was a farmer, born and raised in Nebraska, where the wind carried dust, not salt, and where vegetables were grown in rows, not pulled from tide pools. But at 71, with stiff knees and a sluggish thyroid, Tom found himself searching for something different. He'd always been strong. He built fences with his bare hands, carried hay bales like they were pillows. But lately, strength came harder. His blood sugar hovered in dangerous territory. His heart felt overworked. His doctor mentioned early neuropathy. That hit him harder than he expected. "You've got a fire in the wiring," the doctor said. "It's inflammation, it's metabolic, and it's time to put it out." Tom didn't like pills. He didn't trust what he couldn't pronounce. But one day, while watching a documentary on long-living coastal communities, he saw something that stuck: seaweed. He started small. Crumbled, nori sprinkled over eggs. Wakame stirred into soups. A little kelp added to his salads. The taste was strange at first. Oceanic, briny, but it reminded him of the strength he saw in those fishermen on screen. The ones who moved like younger men and lived without the stiffness that plagued his mornings. Within a month, Tom's energy began to return. He didn't wake up groaning. His feet tingled less. His grip felt firmer around his morning coffee mug. What was happening? Seaweed is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth. It's packed with iodine, which supports healthy thyroid function, a key player in regulating metabolism and energy levels. But beyond that, seaweed contains marine polyphenols and sulfated polysaccharides, which have been shown to reduce inflammation in arteries and slow the absorption of glucose and fat in the digestive system. That means fewer sugar spikes, less arterial clogging, a quieter, calme internal system. And then there's magnesium, potassium, calcium, all minerals that support heart muscle contraction and keep blood pressure in a safer range. Seaweed even contains phytosterols, plant compounds, that block cholesterol absorption and help sweep it out of your system. But for Tom, the benefit wasn't just biological. Eating seaweed became a ritual, a signal to his body that he was still adapting, still learning, still growing, that even a man from landlocked Nebraska could draw strength from the ocean. Because here's the truth, no one tells us enough age isn't a reason to stop evolving. It's the best reason to start. Healing can come from the most unexpected places, even from the depths of the sea. Gloria had always kept her garden neat. Rows of roses, trimmed hedges, wind chimes that whispered in the breeze. But in one forgotten corner behind the fence, something wild grew: dandelions. She used to pull them up without a second thought. Weeds, she'd say, waving her gloved hand like a queen dismissing peasants. But after her 69th birthday, things weren't so tidy anymore. Her blood work told a story of a tired liver, sluggish digestion, rising cholesterol, and stubborn blood sugar. She felt bloated, cranky, heavy not just in body, but in spirit. She had always taken care of others. A retired social worker from Ohio, Gloria, had counseled thousands through trauma, grief, and addiction. But now, her own body was asking for care. And the hardest part? She didn't know how to give it. Then one rainy morning, her niece brought over a jar of dried dandelion root and said something strange. "Aunt Glo, maybe it's time you let the weeds grow." Gloria blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Dandelion tea," her niece smiled. "You drink it. It helps clean you out." So Gloria brewed it. Dark, earthy, a little bitter. She didn't love the taste at first, but something about it felt right, grounded, real. She added a slice of lemon, a stick of cinnamon, some mornings a dash of ginger, and slowly she began to change. Her digestion improved. The bloating shrank. Her energy started coming back, not in leaps but in quiet, lasting waves. Her skin looked clearer. Her morning walks got longer. What dandelion tea did for Gloria was more than flush out water or support her liver, though it did both. It gave her back a sense of rhythm, of release, of renewal. See, dandelions are rich in bitter compounds that stimulate bile production, helping the liver process fats and remove toxins. They're loaded with antioxidants like lutein and beta-carotene, which protect artery walls and reduce inflammation. The tea acts as a gentle diuretic, lowering blood pressure and easing the burden on kidneys, especially important for those managing blood sugar long-term. But here's the deeper truth Gloria discovered. Healing isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's bitter. Sometimes it grows in places you've ignored. Sometimes the very thing you once called a weed turns out to be the medicine you needed all along. She didn't just learn to love dandelion tea. She started letting a few grow wild in her yard. Not because she stopped caring about neatness, but because she started understanding where healing really comes from. So the next time something bitter enters your life, don't pull it out too fast. Sit with it. Sip it. See what it has to teach you. Frank never cared for trends. At 70, he didn't believe in kale smoothies, chia puddings, or anything that came in a powdered pouch. He still wore the same boots he bought in 1986. But what he did care about was staying upright. You see, Frank had nearly fallen twice walking down the porch steps of his cabin in northern Idaho. The first time he blamed his dog. The second time, he couldn't find an excuse. His balance was off. His blood sugar, unpredictable. His cholesterol was creeping higher. His daughter, a physical therapist from Portland, pulled him aside after Thanksgiving and said quietly, "Dad, we need to talk about your brain and your heart." She didn't hand him a supplement bottle. She handed him a grocery list. At the top, cauliflower. Frank laughed. What's a man supposed to do with that? It's like eating a cloud. But he tried it. Roasted with olive oil and garlic, mashed with a pat of butter and some salt. He even blended it into a creamy soup that made him feel like he was in a restaurant. A month later, something strange happened. He didn't feel lightheaded after meals. He remembered names quicker. His walks with his dog lasted longer. And most of all, he hadn't stumbled once. Cauliflower, as plain as it seems, is anything but empty. It's loaded with choline, a brain-nourishing nutrient most people don't get enough of, which helps regulate memory, muscle control, and mood. It also contains glucosinolates, which support liver detoxification and help process fats and sugars more efficiently. And the fiber? That's the secret weapon. It slows down glucose absorption, lowers LDL cholesterol, and keeps digestion moving without the crash and burn. Frank didn't need flashy food. He needed functional food, something that worked quietly in the background, the same way he had for others his whole life. And that's the lesson cauliflower taught him. You don't have to chase what's popular. You just have to choose what works. Sometimes strength isn't found in the loudest voices or the newest fads. Sometimes it's hiding in a pale vegetable you've walked past 100 times. A vegetable that protects your heart, supports your brain, balances your sugar, and asks for nothing in return. Frank still won't eat kale, but every Tuesday, he roasts a whole head of cauliflower with rosemary and lemon and calls it his armor. Ray used to play jazz piano down in New Orleans. Quick fingers, sharp mind, a laugh that filled the whole room. But by 67, those fingers had started to stiffen. His memory? Not gone, but slower, like a needle dragging across a dusty record. He wasn't sick, not officially. But he wasn't well either. His blood sugar had crept into the danger zone. His cholesterol? The kind that clogs. His doctor gave him a choice, meds or lifestyle changes. Ray chose rhythm. His rhythm, that meant walking again, drinking more water, and oddly enough, a new habit that started with a single handful of pumpkin seeds. He picked them up one afternoon at a corner market, more out of curiosity than conviction, toasted them lightly in a pan with a pinch of sea salt, and tossed them into his oatmeal the next morning. They were crunchy, satisfying. But what happened over the next few weeks was anything but ordinary. His hands started moving with more ease. His afternoon fog began to lift. The tingling in his feet became less frequent. When his lab results came back a month later, his doctor raised an eyebrow. Blood pressure down, LDL cholesterol down, fasting glucose better than it had been in a year. Pumpkin seeds may look like humble snacks, but inside each one is a powerful orchestra of healing. They're rich in magnesium, a mineral most older adults are deficient in, which supports steady heartbeat, relaxed blood vessels, and improved insulin sensitivity. That alone can make a world of difference for someone managing blood sugar and blood pressure at once. They're also full of unsaturated fats, particularly alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that reduces inflammation and keeps artery walls smooth and open. And then there are the phytosterols, natural compounds that help block cholesterol absorption in the gut, quietly scrubbing your system every time you chew. Ray didn't just feel better, he felt more himself. There's something profound about that when a simple habit makes you feel like you've come home to your own body again. He started carrying a small bag of pumpkin seeds in his coat pocket, just like sheet music, something ready to play whenever he needed it. And that's the thing about healing, it doesn't always need to be big. Sometimes it's crunchy, portable, easy to overlook, but it changes the tempo of your life. Nancy had always loved breakfast. It was her ritual. A quiet moment before the world got loud, coffee in hand, toast on plate, sun just peeking through her kitchen blinds in Santa Fe. But at 66, breakfast started to feel more like betrayal. The toast spiked her blood sugar. The butter left her feeling heavy. Her doctor's words echoed louder than the morning news. Your heart's working too hard. Your cholesterol's off. Your insulin's getting tired. Nancy didn't cry, not in front of him. But something cracked that day. She didn't want to be a burden to her kids. She didn't want to feel old at 66. A week later, her neighbor, a retired nurse named Evelyn, dropped off a small gift. 2 perfectly ripe avocados and a note. For your heart. Trust me. Nancy wrinkled her nose. She didn't like mushy foods, but Evelyn had never steered her wrong before. So the next morning, she mashed half an avocado onto a piece of whole grain toast. sprinkled a little sea salt, some chili flakes, a drizzle of lemon, took a bite. It was creamy, bright, comforting, like morning should feel. By the end of that first week, Nancy noticed something subtle. Her energy didn't crash by 10. Her stomach felt lighter. She wasn't reaching for snacks to stay full. By the end of the first month, her cholesterol panel told a new story. Her LDL had dropped. Her HDL, the good cholesterol, was rising. Her blood pressure was more stable. And perhaps most important of all, her cravings were quieter. Avocados aren't just trendy. They're packed with monounsaturated fats, particularly oleic acid, that help lower bad cholesterol and reduce inflammation in the arteries. They contain more potassium than bananas, flushing excess sodium and easing blood pressure. But that's not all. They're rich in soluble and insoluble fiber, which slows down the release of sugar into the bloodstream. That means steadier glucose, fewer spikes, less stress on your insulin system. And with their phytosterols and antioxidants, they don't just nourish your body, they protect it from aging on a cellular level. But the most beautiful part? Nancy started looking forward to breakfast again. Not just for the food, for what it represented. A quiet act of self-love. A way to say, I matter enough to nourish myself. And that is the greatest medicine of all. She now keeps avocados in a wooden bowl by the window, just like apples used to be when her kids were little. She eats one almost every day. And every time she does, it's not just her heart that thanks her. It's her soul. Harold never liked winter, not because of the cold, but because of what it did to his body. At 69, living in upstate New York, winters felt longer, darker, and heavier than they used to. His fingers stiffened, his legs ached, and his blood sugar? It danced all over the place, as unpredictable as the snowfall. The doctors called it inflammation. Harold called it frustration. He tried everything they told him: meds, walking, cutting sugar. Some things helped, but the fire inside never quite cooled down. It lived in his joints, behind his eyes, and worst of all in the silence of his chest. Then one snowy evening, while flipping through a box of old cookbooks his late wife had kept, he found a note in her handwriting tucked inside a recipe for carrot soup. For your blood, add fresh ginger. Always helps. She'd written it years ago, probably during one of his colds. But in that moment, it felt like a whisper from beyond. The next morning, Harold peeled a small piece of ginger, sliced it thin, and steeped it into a cup of warm water. He added a squeeze of lemon, a touch of honey, took a cautious sip. It burned gently, a heat that started in his throat and spread through his chest. But it didn't sting. It soothed. He started drinking it every morning. Some days he added it to his soups. Others he grated it into stir-fries. It became part of him, this little root that smelled like memory and tasted like resolve. And slowly, the shift began. His fasting glucose, usually stubborn, came down. His circulation improved. That aching tightness in his legs began to loosen. Even the neuropathy, the pins and needles that had plagued his toes, seemed less aggressive. Ginger, as it turned out, was more than a spice. Its active compound, gingerol, is one of nature's most powerful anti-inflammatories. It works deep in the bloodstream, calming the same silent inflammation that fuels insulin resistance and artery damage. It improves insulin sensitivity, reduces oxidative stress, and promotes healthy blood flow, all critical for managing diabetes and protecting the heart. But there's more. Ginger is also a natural vasodilator. That means it helps blood vessels open up, reducing pressure and improving circulation, especially important in colder months when everything contracts. For Harold, ginger became his internal fire, a way to fight the cold from the inside out. But perhaps more than anything, it reconnected him with his wife, with her wisdom, her care, her quiet way of keeping him alive, even when she wasn't there anymore. Some mornings, as he sips his ginger tea by the window, He swears he can feel her hand on his shoulder. And that's what healing sometimes looks like: a cup of tea, a piece of memory, and the warmth of knowing you're still worth fighting for. Emmett had spent most of his 72 years under the sun. A retired roofer from Phoenix, he was a man of tan skin, calloused hands, and no-nonsense wisdom. But when he got sick, it wasn't heat stroke or a bad back that took him down. It was his heart. One evening after dinner, he felt tightness in his chest. Not pain exactly, more like a slow squeeze. The ER ruled out a heart attack, but the tests didn't lie. High triglycerides, stiff arteries, blood pressure edging into the danger zone. His doctor warned, "Your heart's tired, Emmett, and it's time you start caring for it." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent a lifetime building things that lasted: roofs, homes, reputations. But now his own body was starting to buckle. A few days later, while visiting his grandson's college apartment, he noticed a jar of sun-dried tomatoes on the counter. His grandson was tossing them into pasta, and Emmett, skeptical as ever, asked, "What's the point of drying a tomato if you're just going to soak it again?" The boy laughed. "They're better this way, Grandpa. More flavor. More good stuff." Turns out, he was right. Emmett started adding a few slices to his eggs in the morning, blending them into homemade sauces, even tossing them into salads with a bit of olive oil. The flavor was bold, tangy, intense, like something that had survived fire and come out stronger. And maybe that's why they worked, because inside each sun-dried tomato is a concentration of lycopene, a powerful antioxidant that becomes more potent when tomatoes are dried. Lycopene helps reduce oxidative stress on the arteries, lowers blood pressure, and improves vascular flexibility. But that's just the beginning. Sun-dried tomatoes are also rich in potassium, a mineral that balances sodium and helps the heart beat more steadily. They provide fiber, which slows sugar absorption and supports gut health, something people with diabetes or blood sugar issues desperately need. What Emmett noticed was subtle at first. He didn't puff up after meals. His blood pressure readings at home started trending downward. His chest didn't feel so heavy after walking the dog. And one day, after climbing the stairs to the library without gasping for air, he sat down on a bench and smiled. "I ain't done yet," he whispered. Sun-dried tomatoes reminded Emmett of himself, shriveled a bit by time, but packed with flavor, strength, and more power than meets the eye. And here's what you can take from his story. Sometimes healing doesn't mean adding more. Sometimes it means concentrating what you already have. Distilling your habits down to the ones that nourish. Keeping what matters. Letting go of what doesn't. Like a tomato kissed by fire, you too can come back stronger. Ben wasn't the kind of man who asked for help. At 74, he'd lived through war, watched a marriage end, buried a younger brother, and still showed up to mow his neighbor's lawn every Saturday. He didn't like doctors, didn't trust anything he couldn't hold in his hands, and didn't believe in the word stress. But his body did. His blood pressure was climbing. His blood sugar spiked more often than not. His heart fluttered in ways he didn't talk about. He hadn't slept through the night in years. And his temper, once measured, composed, had begun to fray like an old rope. Then one afternoon, in the small kitchen of his Montana cabin, he found an old green tin his daughter had left behind. On the label, organic green tea, anti-stress, anti-aging, antioxidant, rich. He chuckled at first. Sounds like snake oil. But for reasons he couldn't explain, or maybe didn't want to, he boiled some water, dropped in the bag, and sat by the window to wait. The first sip was strange. Bitter, earthy, but not unpleasant. He finished the whole cup. The next day, he had another. And then another. Within a week, something started shifting. He wasn't snapping as easily at the news. His morning blood sugar, usually erratic, began to stabilize. And the palpitations? Less frequent, less alarming. Green tea became Ben's new ritual. Not because it was trendy, because it worked. Behind its simplicity lies a powerhouse of healing. Green tea is loaded with catechins, especially EGCG, one of the most studied antioxidants on the planet. These compounds reduce the oxidation of LDL cholesterol, the kind that clogs arteries and fuels heart disease. They calm inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and protect the delicate lining of blood vessels. But for Ben, the magic wasn't just chemical. Green tea slowed him down, centered him. The amino acid L-theanine found only in tea leaves brought a sense of mental calm without drowsiness. That was something whiskey never gave him, something no pill had ever managed. He began sleeping better, thinking clearer, feeling more like himself. And that's the deeper lesson. Sometimes what we need isn't another stimulant, another fix. It's a pause, a moment, a cup held warm in both hands that says, "You're still here, you're still fighting, and there's strength in stillness." Ben still doesn't talk much about stress, but every afternoon, as the light shifts across the hardwood floors, he brews a cup of green tea. No sugar, no rush, just balance. And if that sounds like something your heart could use, maybe it's time for one more step on this journey. Diane always believed in taking care of others. As a mother of 4, a retired kindergarten teacher from Oregon, and a widow for over a decade, she spent her life worrying about everyone else, their lunches, their doctor appointments, their worries. But when her own health began to slip, blood sugar creeping up, cholesterol edging past the limit, legs aching more after her evening walks, she brushed it off as just aging. Until one morning, her youngest grandson, Mason, handed her a strawberry. It was freshly picked, still warm from the sun. She hadn't eaten one in years. Said it was too sugary. But that morning, with Mason's blue eyes watching her, she took a bite, and everything stopped. The taste, sweet, tart, juicy, hit her like a memory. Summer picnics, garden baskets, her late husband sneaking them into her purse at the farmer's market. She blinked back tears. That was the moment she realized something no doctor had ever told her. Healing doesn't have to taste like sacrifice. It can taste like joy. So she started adding strawberries to her morning yogurt, tossed them into her spinach salads, froze them for little afternoon treats. And what started as a whim turned into transformation. Her A1C began to drop. Her post-meal blood sugar stayed more stable. Her skin looked brighter. She moved easier, smiled more. What makes strawberries so powerful isn't just their taste, it's what's inside. They're rich in anthocyanins, the pigments that give them their vibrant red color. And those compounds do serious work, reducing inflammation, improving blood vessel flexibility, and helping regulate blood pressure. They're also packed with vitamin C, which supports collagen in the blood vessels and protects the lining from damage caused by sugar. Manganese, another essential in strawberries, helps the body produce antioxidant enzymes, a kind of natural armor against aging and disease. And best of all, strawberries have a low glycemic index. That means they release sugar slowly, preventing those spikes that leave people like Diane feeling foggy, tired, or dizzy. But for Diane, the most important shift wasn't in the numbers. It was in the mirror. She started dressing again in bright colors, watering her plants, singing along to the radio while washing dishes, because every strawberry she ate whispered, "You still deserve joy." And that's the truth we all forget too easily, especially as we age. We're told to remove, restrict, reduce. But what if the real healing begins when we add back the things that make us feel alive? Sometimes the medicine isn't bitter. Sometimes it's bright red, slightly tart, and makes you smile with every bite. By now, you've met them all: the roots, the leaves, the seeds, the fruits. But let me tell you something I've learned after working with thousands of people past the age of 60. It's not just what you eat, it's how you begin. Mornings are sacred. They whisper the tone of your whole day. And for many of the people whose stories I've shared, Ronald, Margaret, James, Clara, Loretta, Harold, there came a moment when they needed more than separate ingredients. They needed a ritual. And that's where the miracle garlic recipe was born. It didn't start in a lab. It started in a quiet kitchen, early light spilling across a wooden countertop, where a person like you stood and decided, I still have more life to live. Here's how it works. You take 4 raw cloves of garlic firm, fresh, and crush them. Not diced, not minced, crushed. This is important because crushing activates a compound called allicin, the heartbeat of garlic's healing power. Then you let it rest for 5 to 10 minutes. Just breathe. Let it come alive. Meanwhile, pour yourself about 2 cups of filtered water. Add the juice of 1 fresh lemon, the kind that makes your fingers sticky. If you like, stir in a teaspoon of raw honey, not just for sweetness, but for its own antibacterial and antioxidant support. Once the garlic has rested, add it into the water mixture. Stir gently. Sip slowly on an empty stomach. First thing in the morning. Wait at least 20 minutes before eating anything else. You'll feel the warmth, the slight burn in the back of your throat, the kick that reminds you, this isn't just a drink, it's a declaration. Why does it work? Because garlic lowers blood sugar, reduces LDL cholesterol, thins the blood, and fights inflammation, all without a prescription. Lemon supports your liver, boosts circulation, and gives your arteries a daily dose of vitamin C. Honey soothes your gut and calms the immune system. Water carries it all into your bloodstream like a gentle river sweeping through a cluttered town. But it's not just the science. It's the message. Every morning you make this. You're sending a signal to your cells, your heart, your habits, that you're not done yet. That you believe your body is still capable of balance, of strength, of healing. People who've adopted this ritual often report more than just lower numbers. They talk about better skin, sharper focus, more stable moods, even improved sleep. But perhaps the most powerful benefit, a sense of control. In a world that too often treats aging like a slow fade-out, this recipe is your comeback note. A gentle, daily protest against decline. A way of saying, not today, because you don't need perfect genes, expensive supplements, or miracle pills. You just need a clove of garlic, a slice of lemon, a little time, and a promise to yourself. And now, with all 16 ingredients united, each one tested, trusted, and rooted in both tradition and science, your healing journey has a foundation. It begins with a sip. It builds with a habit. And it lasts. As long as you keep showing up for yourself. If you'd like, I can guide you through creating a simple morning calendar to help you stay consistent with this routine, or share how others have adapted this into their lives with family, travel, and aging in mind. But first, I'll wait for your next cue. There's a moment somewhere around 65, maybe earlier, maybe later, when you stop measuring life by milestones and start measuring it by mornings. How do you wake up? What do you put in your body? How do you feel walking across the room? Do your hands tremble? Does your mind race? Or do you breathe steady? For every person I've walked alongside, whether it was Diane tasting strawberries again, or Ben finding peace in a warm cup of green tea, the breakthrough never came from just one ingredient. It came from the moment they stopped waiting to be fixed and started choosing to care. That's what this garlic ritual represents. Not magic, not a cure, but a rhythm built on 16 simple natural gifts from the earth that reminds you, each day, that your body is still listening, still trying, still capable of change. You've seen how garlic, hibiscus, celery, pomegranate, flax, cucumber, seaweed, dandelion, cauliflower, pumpkin seeds, avocado, ginger, sun-dried tomato, green tea, and strawberry, each in their own quiet way support the organs and systems that keep you alive. But together, they form something even more powerful. They form intention. And that is what keeps people alive longer, not just in years, but in strength, clarity, independence, and dignity. You don't need to become someone new. You just need to return to the you that believed life was still worth fighting for. So here's my invitation to you. Start with a clove of garlic. Let it remind you of your own power. And as the days go on, let the rest follow one habit, one walk, one bite at a time. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too late. This is just the beginning.